Perfect. All right, Anna, thumbs up. Should we get started? Maybe? All right, I'm going to do it. We're going to get started officially. So welcome, everyone. We are delighted to be here for this Instagram Live to talk to you about embryo donation. My name is Rachel Loftspring, and I am joined today with Dr. Thakore. And just to kick us off a little bit, I will tell you a little bit about myself and why we're doing this. So my name is Rachel Loftspring. I am a partner at Essig & Evans. We are a boutique family and fertility law firm located in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I practice fertility law exclusively. So this means I counsel clients from around the United States and around the world on family building through surrogacy and also through egg, sperm, and embryo donation. So my clients are intended parents and carriers. They are recipients and donors. They're single and married and of all sexual orientations. I am a Cincinnati native. I graduated from University of Pennsylvania Law School and also Emory University for undergrad. And outside of my legal practice, one of my major community commitments is on the board of the Jewish Fertility Foundation. I'm currently vice chair, although hopefully after our board meeting tonight, we'll be named the chair for the next couple of years. So I'm very excited about that. And I want to take this opportunity to thank JFF for hosting this Instagram Live and also tell you a little bit about JFF. So Jewish Fertility Foundation is an organization. It was founded in Atlanta, and we've since expanded to Cincinnati, to Birmingham, and Tampa, and we are in the process of looking at other cities to expand to as well. When I think about Jewish Fertility Foundation, I think about it as a three-legged stool. We do three major things. First thing we do is we provide financial assistance to people going through infertility. We provide emotional support, and we provide educational awareness. So just to dig in slightly on each of those things, on the financial assistance, we provide IVF and IUI grants for folks who are working with our partner clinics in the cities where we are. Our wonderful partner clinics also then give a discount to our grantees, and we work with local organizations to provide interest-free loans. So between the grant and the discount and the interest-free loans, we work to bring down the cost of going through infertility treatments. Of course, it's not all money alone that makes it hard, and that's the reason why we have emotional support. And we do this through two major ways. We have fertility support groups that meet regularly with a fertility therapist, and those meet in Cincinnati and Atlanta and in the other places as well. And we've been working with that virtually over COVID and also going back to in-person. The other really wonderful thing that we do is we provide fertility buddies, which is a program that we've developed where we match somebody who has gone through infertility, what we call a veteran, with somebody going through infertility. We train the veterans, and they are really there to hold and support the person going through infertility. And the last thing we do is educational programming. So things like this. We also provide educational programming for folks who have a family member or loved one going through infertility. We do trainings at clinics to advise on what some of the needs may be for more religious Jewish patients. And then we also provide training for clergy and rabbis about what it means for a congregate to go through infertility. So those are the three legs of the stool: fertility grants, emotional support, and educational programming. And so I'm going to stop here because I've talked a lot and turn it over to Dr. Thakore. Thank you so much for joining. And I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself a little bit.
Perfect. So like we had mentioned a little earlier, I'm a Buffalo native that has slowly made her way south down into the Cincinnati area. I joined University of Cincinnati as a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist in 2016. And one of the first things that I took over when I came here was this third-party reproduction concept, and really taking the reins from the old providers that were here that had created the program and really established the program, and then had left to go to a different city. So it was kind of just fell into my lap, and I absolutely love every bit of it. And there's so many weird little intricacies about the process that makes it really exciting, and every case is very different. So I am the director of the third party program here at University of Cincinnati, and now the division director of our division, the reproductive endocrinology and infertility division as well. So that's kind of like my medical background here in Cincinnati. I grew up in Buffalo, did med school residency in Buffalo, and so I love the snow. I'm a huge Buffalo Bills fan, but I've adopted the Bearcats and also our Bengals as well through the process. So if you want to talk football, that's like my thing. So like my little thing about me, I guess.
That's wonderful. Side note, my husband is a huge Michigan fan, and we are going to be in Georgia when they play Georgia. For our Atlanta from JFF, he actually said, well, how am I going to actually stay at our friend's house when they're Georgia fans? I told him he could probably figure that out. So tell us why you joined the JFF Advisory Council for the Medical Advisory Council.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think it was this year, I ended up joining the advisory council. And I honestly think that this is a fantastic opportunity for all of our patients. We know the financial and the emotional burden that comes with infertility and having to go through these different treatments. And to be able to be part of a medical advisory board that allows us to kind of help solve some of these problems for these patients that are coming through, I couldn't imagine doing anything different. So when I was posed with the opportunity to join the medical board, it was a no-brainer. I think that, not only can we provide medical advice and guidance to patients as they're going through this process, but to be able to have the opportunity to provide them with emotional support and background and even financial support, I think is really important, so that it's a well-rounded picture. We're not just giving them a medical answer that they have to then come up with everything else by themselves. It's like you said, you have to provide all different branches of support. It's not just the medical advice.
And we're so thankful that you've joined. So I'm excited to have you on it. So let's talk about embryo donation, and maybe let's start from the medical side and give kind of a background and basics when it comes to embryo donation and creating embryos.
Yeah, so embryo donation is not a newer concept. It's just become a lot more publicized and a lot more accepted in the third-party reproduction realm. So third-party reproduction is utilizing somebody else's genetic material or somebody else's uterus to be able to create a pregnancy that may not be within the couple that's intending to keep the child. So that includes your egg donors, it includes your sperm donors, it includes the gestational carriers, and now it includes embryo donation. So the concept of embryo donation came up because a lot of couples have now gone through the IVF process. This started in the late 1970s, and so we've got embryos now that have been created that are not being used anymore. The patients that had created those embryos extra embryos left over. They finished their family building. They are not looking to have any more children, but they don't want to do something that potentially could be harmful to these embryos, like discarding them if they choose not to keep them frozen. So they're good, viable embryos. They're frozen in time, and they have every ability to create a pregnancy. And so this program of embryo donation has slowly surfaced, where couples that have created these embryos are now transitioning them to other couples that are having trouble creating a pregnancy of their own. So it follows in the genetics as a traditional adoption, because you are not genetically tied to the sperm or egg that created these embryos, but you have the capability of carrying that pregnancy. And that's the benefit of this program, is that you still have that attachment and that bond to that pregnancy because you're the one carrying it for the full 10 months. And then that child is truly yours. And one of the other benefits is that you know what the child has been exposed to throughout the pregnancy because you're the one carrying it, which is a little different than what traditional adoption would provide.
And are there certain screenings that folks have to go through for embryo donation?
Yeah, so embryo donation is a little different in regards to these embryos have already been created, and so they were created according to the policy from when they were initially created, whether it be 10 years ago, 5 years ago, just recently. So the national recommendations are for those putting the embryos up for donation is to undergo certain testing and screening that would then basically show that there's a low risk of infectious disease transmission from the genetic mother and father that created the embryo to the new intended parents that are going to be carrying and having that pregnancy. So there is some testing that needs to be done on the end of the people donating the embryos. And then the testing for the people accepting the embryos are going to be more or less the same as any infertility workup. We would really want to make sure that the uterine cavity is normal, that the embryos have a good place to rest. We want to make sure the hormone profiles are appropriate. So then we'll look at your hormone profiles and make sure that there doesn't any medical things that need to be tweaked to be able to help ensure the best successful pregnancy. And then also just the normal sexually transmitted disease workup that would be really required for anybody undergoing infertility treatments.
Right. I know that sometimes I'm asked about, well, what are the legal considerations when we're thinking about embryo donation? And I'm going to start here with a general overview of things that no matter where you are should be considered, because the law about embryo donation varies state by state. So one thing that should be considered a prerequisite before moving forward with an embryo donation is making sure that the embryos can actually be donated to another recipient for family building purposes. So when we think of an embryo, it's created using a sperm and an egg. It's possible that that embryo was created using donor sperm, donor egg, or that that embryo had been donated previously before. And so if any of those things apply, we want to make sure that the resulting embryo can then be redonated to another for family building purposes. And there's a couple of ways that we do that. First, we find out, was there an agreement? Was there an egg donor agreement, a sperm donor agreement, an embryo donor agreement previously? If so, we need to look at that to see what the disposition content is and to make sure that donating it to another party for family building purposes was permitted. There's not always an agreement, and so then we're looking to the consents that would have been signed with the fertility clinic or perhaps the bank. Occasionally, we don't have consents, and then we need to go back to the bank, and this tends to happen most with a sperm donor arrangement where we get the bank to tell us in writing that there is consent to redonate the embryo that was created using that donated sperm. It really is matter specific though, and so here's where you want to work with an attorney to make sure that your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, to make sure that you can actually either donate if you are the donor or receive if you are the recipient the embryo. Another thing that comes up as we're talking about agreements and consents is, okay, do I even need an agreement? And if I don't, when would I want an agreement? Well, place where somebody might want an agreement is if there's a known donor, and I kind of say known donor because there's really no such thing as anonymous anymore, and also the future donor conceived person may want to know about his or her genetic heritage, and many donor conceived people actually consider it a right to know this information. So between that and the fact that we have the direct to consumer DNA testing, we have social networking, we have the donor sibling registry, all those things make it somewhat not totally correct to say an unknown or anonymous donor, because down the road it can be found out. That said, if you do go the anonymous route, you can still have an agreement. Being anonymous does not preclude having a direct agreement. So why would you want to do that if you have a known donor? Well, you might want to get specific when it comes to things like what expenses are being covered. And when I say expenses, I want to point out here, like, we are not talking about payment for genetic material or a child. This is truly covering the expenses. So for example, something like storage fees, at what points does that get taken over? This is talking about fertility clinic fees. Those kinds of things are laid out. We also talk about more specifically confidentiality, the potential for future contact, redonation again, what does that look like? What do the parties agree to? And other disposition options. We also might need a contract if it's required by law. Some states might require that. Some matching programs may require it, and some clinics might require it. So that's another instance where you would need to have an one thing that it does really nicely is it evidences the party's intent to move forward with the arrangement. You've got two parties who have informed consent because an attorney has gone through the agreement with both of them, and they really know what they're getting into. They're able to expressly say they know what they're getting into, and they're able to consent to that, and that is really helpful down the road as well. One thing I want to point out when it comes to agreements, the agreements are between two parties, and that is the recipient, one or two, and then the donors, and again, one or two. The child, the donor or conceived person, is not a party to the agreement. He or she cannot be. She does not exist at this point. And so he or she is not beholden to the terms of the agreement. And so this then goes back again to the whole anonymous notion, donor conceived person may grow up and want to know that information, and there's nothing stopping him or her from pursuing that. The last thing I'll say on this from kind of the general standpoint is it's really important to make sure that your agreement is consistent with the consent forms that you're signing at the clinic and also your will. And I do suggest, if you have embryos, they're considered personal property, that you have a will or other estate planning documentation that covers what should happen to your embryo should, God forbid, something ever happen to you. So that's kind of general, and I'd love to talk about, so I want to donate an embryo, I want to receive an embryo. How do I do this from the medical point of view?
Yeah. So, when we talk about how to approach this, especially if this is something new, it's always important to link up with one of the fertility sites, whatever fertility provider you have, because we're going to be the ones that have the more direct lines to be able to help you figure this out. So whether it is, if you're potentially considering this as an option to receive embryos, you don't need to have that all planned out right away. You just need to come and see us. We have resources, we have contacts, we have different organizations that you can work with to potentially get more information and find different avenues to find donated embryos. Okay. If you are interested in potentially of a person that potentially has embryos left over, and in talking you have this known couple that's going to be giving you embryos, that also requires a fertility specialist to kind of help you coordinate and arrange that process. So that could then theoretically be coming from the lawyers, and that would be a referral that would be coming from a lawyer that then sends those patients over to us. Or it could be something where you say, hey, I know that this is a thing, this is what I want to do. And then we can then help you start getting the process together in regards to meeting the lawyers and getting all the nitty gritty details figured out along the way. Because I think one of the other things that that I want to mention, especially with our practice, is that we do have the couples see a psychiatrist that is very much a mediator in this process, because whenever you're using any third party individual, whether it be sperm, egg, embryo, or a gestational carrier, there's a lot of questions that come up along the way that you may have not thought about. And so it's really important for us to be able to provide you someone that is that mediator to ask those questions and to potentially just make sure that you have a full understanding and you don't, nothing comes up along the way while we're already halfway through the process. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind too. So we would help you get all that organized. If you decided that you have embryos stored and you are no longer desiring to utilize those embryos and you want to place those embryos for donation, please reach out to the fertility clinic where you have embryos stored, because we would be then able to provide you with opportunities of different organizations or different lists or whatever to be able to place those embryos up for donation as well. So either way, whatever direction you're coming from, usually the medical doctor is going to be your best place to start.
And I love the plug for mental health, because I think that's so important. And we think a lot about like what's going on right now, but especially when you're talking about having a child, there's more going on down the road, and just having a full contextual understanding of that for the donor and for the recipient is so important. So when I think about, what do you need to do from the legal side, I'm coming at it from Ohio. So here I'll dive a little bit into Ohio. So Ohio has an embryo donation statute, which is great on one hand, and it basically says, a woman delivering a child who is born as a result of embryo donation is considered the mother, and her spouse is the father, assuming he consents. It also says that the donor is not treated in law as the parent, and that it does not apply to surrogacy. So we're happy that we have a donation statute, but it does leave a little bit to be desired. One area that it doesn't address is redonation. So the statutory law just assumes that the donors provided the gametes, the sperm and the egg, and that the recipient is receiving that. It doesn't consider the possibility that there could be this redonation step. And the other thing that it is not is gender neutral, and we have arguments that we should treat it gender neutral, but it is not written in a gender neutral way. So the contract, the agreement in Ohio is not required, but it is suggested in a lot of scenarios for some of the reasons I talked about previously. There might even be additional legal work that you might want to pursue. Again, conversation to have with your attorney based on your situation and also where you are in the country. I also want to point out that from a legal perspective in Ohio, we look at embryo donation and not as embryo adoption. And I think sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. So I always like to point out, adoption is something that is set up. It's a statutory framework. There's a legal process, and it is there to protect a child who is already born. There's court dates, there's home visits, there's legal fees. There's a lot that goes into it. ASRM and the American College of OBGYNs, they look at embryos as something that has special status because of its possibility to become a human, but it's not a human. And so embryo donation is more akin to, what would happen from a procreative standpoint for a couple who does not need to undergo fertility than adoption. So I'm always very careful to say embryo donation with this. Now, that said, there are certainly organizations out there who look at it as adoption and who treat it as adoption, and so who will go through that process, and that might be suitable for certain donors and for certain recipients. But from a legal perspective, there is no such thing as embryo adoption. Anything else on your end from the medical side about testing of embryos to make sure that they could be transferred?
Yeah, and so I think that, the point that you just made about a donation versus adoption, I think when we first started doing this, everybody was using that terminology, the adoption terminology. And I've been really, over this last year and a half, I've been really trying hard to make sure that we as an office, really do document it and also consider it as a true donation process, because that's what it is. It's there's no monetary value assigned to the embryos. It really truly is just one family donating and providing their genetic material to another family, so then that family has the ability to still create a family in general, and create children. And so I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. I think, like we talked about, just a quick summary for the medical stuff, I think it's really important if you're donating embryos to just know that you're going to be asked to undergo some testing in regards to FDA policy, just to be able to show that there's no infectious material being passed from one family to another. If you are going to be on the side of accepting the embryos, then you're going to be undergoing normal fertility workup that you would have if you were to be using your own embryos as a frozen status. And you also then, will have the legal aspect of it that we would definitely want you to have in place. Certain organizations that you work with already have a lot of that already laid out for you. Other organizations will require you to, seek help from fertility specialists, like Rachel. So I think it really just depends on where you're going to be getting your embryos from, and we can help you organize all of that. And then that psychiatric component too. And even if it's not something that you're considering now, this is definitely a step that a lot of individuals have to wrap their head around. Any version of third party, it's not the typical traditional view of how to create a pregnancy, right? And so a lot of patients, it takes a few steps and it takes a little bit of time to really come around to that concept. And we like to say that there's two parts that become a child. There's carrying the pregnancy and the bond that's created from creating and carrying a pregnancy. And then there's the genetic material and that bond that comes from being genetically related. And I think, certain patients have to come to terms with one version or the other of that. And sometimes it may not be both, but to be able to still have that sensation and that experience of pregnancy, this is definitely an option that is available to patients now that may have not been an option, 5-10 years ago down the road. So I think it's definitely important to keep that in mind. And when it comes to success rates, we always get that question, like, how successful is this? It really depends on the age of the genetic mother that created the embryos. It's dependent on the quality of the embryo. It's dependent on when it was frozen, how it was frozen. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that question. It's a very loaded question. So it's very hard to give you general specifics in regards to, this is the average. It just really depends on what kind of embryos we're getting. But what I can tell you, we do a lot of it now in our practice, and we're seeing very good success rates that are very equivalent to what we have in our frozen embryo transfer. Just patients using their own embryos in frozen embryo transfers, we're seeing very similar rates, if not better. So honestly, I would say that this is not something that's going to hurt.
I don't know if I have questions. I'm trying to do this and it's a little bit above my technological expertise. So somebody has asked, who pays for the testing of the embryos? You want to take that? Do you want me to take that?
So I can tell you, I think at least a little bit of it. So the embryos themselves will not be tested. It'll be the individuals that created the embryos that are going to be tested. So that really depends on how the embryos are being donated. If they're being donated directly to someone, like more of like a known directed donation, that's something that then would end up getting worked out potentially in legal contracts, just depending on what the recommendation is. Usually we have the parents that are donating the embryos take on the burden of the testing, just because it's guaranteeing that the embryos can actually be donated and there's no harm that's being created by donating them. So that's kind of how we do it at our office, but I can tell you every agreement that we've had is a little different. And then some of the organizations that then help mediate these type of transfers of embryos, they also have similar arrangements, just depending on the way their contracts are set up.
Right, absolutely. I completely agree from my end as well. It kind of depends on what you're doing, what you need, who you're using, locations, travel. There's a lot of variables that can potentially go into it. And then ethical considerations for donation.
So I think there's definitely there's always risks when you're using some other genetic material to create a pregnancy that's not your own. But usually when embryos are being donated, they come with a family profile. So what the family history is, the family background, what diseases may be running in that family. So it's not, even though it may be anonymous, in a sense, you still get a very good understanding of the history that comes with that embryo. So you can make an educated decision for yourself if that's something that you want to pursue or not. So just like if you were using an egg donor or a sperm donor and they come with this massive profile with a history of their education and this and that, you're going to get very similar information, maybe not as in depth, but you're definitely going to get very similar information to make sure that you have the ability to make the right decision for yourself and understand what burden and risks may come with that.
Right. And I think that's, informed consent is so important here for the donors and the recipients. And I think this is where counseling comes in, legal, medical, and then also the mental health. It is really huge because it is a big step to take. And I think acknowledging not just the ethical piece of it, but also the different interests in it. The recipients might have different interests than the donor. The recipient might not want to know the donor. They might want to know everything about the donor. And then you have this donor conceived person who also has his or her own interests that need to be taken into account. So everybody is kind of working collaboratively in this process, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's interests are 100% the same. And also keeping in mind the time component is this as well. What somebody could be thinking when they create embryos versus when they donate it versus when they receive it versus when they have a child. I mean, we all change how we feel about things as we go through different processes in our life. And so I think it's important that we understand that going into this and allow for that with the help of our medical advisors, legal counsel, and mental health professionals. I think it's really, really important. How many donors tend to have an open relationship with the recipients or vice versa? I've never seen numbers on this. Have you?
No, I haven't either. I can tell you anecdotally, it really honestly depends on the couple that's coming to us. And there's certain organizations where I feel like couples from those organizations are a lot more wanting to have that open relationship. Whereas I feel like like I said, some people come to us with known donors, like they know where they're getting their embryos from. So in that sense, they already know the family, they already know the kids that have already been created from that embryo set potentially, and I think that that's a big thing too, is to take into account there's this alternative party, which is the children that have already been created from this embryo set that aren't part of these agreements, and their desires in the future to maybe know their genetic siblings is also something to take into account too. There's going to be this next generation of genetically similar siblings that may be growing up in two different families, two different parts of the country or parts of the world, so I think that that's something to take into account too when you're considering this as an option.
Great point. Yes, absolutely. I think that is our list of questions. How can patients who are interested find you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find us is to, to look us up online and look for UC Health Fertility Center. It's a center for reproductive health. That's, you'll have direct information there. If you wanted to contact us directly, our office phone number would be the first place that we would recommend that you go to. It's 513-475-7600. We have offices in downtown Cincinnati, doing the downtown Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky area. We've got offices in Westchester, Ohio, and then also offices up in Dayton and Kettering. So, we've got practices all over. You can find us at all these different locations. It's not just in one site. We're a very big university-based practice, so either one of me, or like myself or one of our providers would definitely be able to help you to get this process started, whether it be your own fertility journey or an alternative fertility journey that utilizes this third-party process.
Amazing. Thank you. And for folks out there, you can find me at rl@essigevans.com. You can find me on Instagram here at this account at Fertility Law Attorney. And please do check out Jewish Fertility Foundation online. We're going to record this event. We've got other events that are recorded about embryo donation, about other fertility matters. There's resources on there, doctors, mental health professionals, etc. So definitely give that a look as well. And I am now going to try to end this video and actually record it. So bear with me. But Dr. Thakore, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to speak with you. And I will see you Friday.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, for putting this together. This was fantastic, and any opportunity to talk about these different options, it's near and dear to my heart, and I love it. So I will see you all soon.
Perfect. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.